Hello, namaste everybody. I am Govinda Puri. Today here I am going to talk about the short story, The Open Window by Saki. This story is kept there under the second unit of English for the New Millennium book, which is uh, referred as the course book for the B.Ed first year students. Out of 9 stories, this story is very important for us from uh, two perspectives. The first one is to understand the psychology, and then the next one it's very important from the perspective of preparing for exam. Let me get started. This is very short video. I hope this video will help you to understand the story and get prepared for the final exam as well. This story is authored by Hector Hughes Monroe. He's also known as the as the pen name Saki, and also frequently known as H.S. Munro, who was a British writer. He was born on December 18, 1870 in Myanmar, Burma, and died on November 14, 1916 in France. He is well known by his pen name Saki. Let me go to the characters of the story. There are mainly a few characters who are very popular in the story, and they are the Frampton Hotel, Vera Sapleton, and Mrs. Sapleton. These three characters are very important to understand here in the story. Yeah. Now let me talk about Frampton Hotel, who has moved to the country in the hopes that this relaxing atmosphere will soothe his nerves. So he's utterly deceived by Vera's story and flees the house when he believes he has seen ghosts, because he visits the village and then wants to get relief from the psychological problem. But in the village, he's engaged by a young girl of 15 years. Her name is Vera Sapleton. Vera Sapleton is a self-possessed 15-year-old girl and who is adept at inventing stories. It's very good at inventing stories, creating stories, and making people believe her stories, and who always terrifies Frampton with her tale about the open window. In the house, there is an open window, and then Vera Sapleton tells the story about that open window and terrifies Frampton Hotel. And the next character is Mrs. Sapleton. So it's Vera's aunt, and she is a cheerful woman who attempts to engage Frampton in light conversation. And then, yeah, she lives in the village. Yeah, in the light conversation, and is surprised by the sudden exit from the house. The summary of the story goes like this way. The Open Window by Saki is a 1914 short story about Frampton Hotel, who is frightened by the fanciful lies of his new neighbor's niece. Her name is Vera. And while visiting his neighbors, Frampton meets Vera, who explains that her uncle and his brothers-in-law drowned in a moon 3 years ago on a hunting trip. Her aunt leaves the window open because she believes they will eventually return back home. And when the hunters, who actually only left that morning, return, Frampton believes they are ghosts and flees. Vera explains his departure as a result of his fear of dogs, triggered by the appearance of the hunter's spaniel. The story has some major themes. The main theme in the story, The Open Window, are appearances versus reality, and the discomfort of company and the suspension of disbelief. These are the main themes in the story. The appearances versus reality. Let's talk about this one. Whereas stories present false appearances, Vera crafts, the story, or imagining, and then tries to terrify Natal, concealing the reality behind them and causing great misunderstanding for Frampton. The next theme is discomfort of company. The interaction between Frampton and the Sapleton family are uncomfortable due to the situation at hand. Frampton's character and Vera's untruths. Vera creates the story which is not true, that is imaginative story that terrifies Frampton. Uh, Not tell, sorry. The suspension of disbelief. The story clearly remarks on the suspension of disbelief that all fiction on the depends on uh, forcing readers to confront their own gullibility. Gullibility here means mm, the act of making someone believe what one says. You can also watch the story in the YouTube videos. I've just put here the link for you. You guys, you can enjoy that. And in Monroe's, the open window, Vera shows herself to be bright, imaginative, resourceful, posed, and alive. Because Vera, a young 15-year-old girl, tells the story in the name of engaging Natal in the absence of Mrs. Sapleton. And but that story creates a kind of terror in the mind of Natal, and he runs away from the house. So we can go to the detail of the story. Vera, as I said to you already, is the 15-year-old niece of Mrs. Sapleton. In contrast to the high, strong, and anxious Frampton Natal, Vera is described within the narrative itself as self-possessed, and as the story unveils, the swiftly displays imaginative and creative personality. As she fabricates, exaggerates, and creates the stories of how her aunt's husband and brothers had disappeared or perished hunting 3 years earlier. These details combine to have an agitating effect on Nuttall, who was the chance visitor at Mrs. Sapleton house, uh, and which will become even more pronounced when the hunters actually do return. At this point, Nuttall's nerves become too much for him and he flees the house. Berat then proceeds to invent another fabrication, another story, and then Vera uh, makes him flee from the House. Vera then further invents other stories, series of stories, and explains, the uh, the story behind three young men going out from the window, and she says that her aunt still believes that these three people will come back from the same window. That's why the windows are kept open. She explains away Nuttall's reaction with another imaginative tale when Mrs. Plampton comes back. Again, she tells the imaginative story and uh, makes Sapleton believe that. At the same time, even as Behra can be called a storyteller and a liar, she can also be labeled enigmatic given that we don't actually know what motivates her to lie in the first place. Is it created out of boredom, with Vera using these lies and stories as a way to amuse herself? Is her lying habitual? Is it actively malicious, aimed with the purpose of unsettling Nuttall? Is there some other explanation altogether? Saki does not tell us. From this perspective, much of her personality is left a mystery. We know that she lies. What we do not know is why. Because Vera, 15 years old lady, tells the terrifying story to Mr. Nuttall, maybe because she wants to engage him for the time her aunts come back, or maybe to prove herself as the good storyteller, or maybe she was very good at imagination. So it is not well known in the story. We can guess from multiple perspectives. The reasons might be anyone. So we learn quite a bit about Vera in this story. We don't know much about her. Vera is a bright, imaginative, and self-possessed 15-year-old who can spin a good tale, who can tell a good story, who can engage the people by telling the story, or she is very good storyteller. She also defies the expectation of the adults around her. Since she was beautiful, bright, she could, engage the young people, the adult people around her and the reader by being an accomplished liar. Vera uses her lying to manipulate events to amuse and benefit herself. She and her aunt was to repress Ian when Mr. Nuttall starts talking about his medical problems, are bored with this house guest. There are shows wicked resourcefulness and ingenuity when she gets Mr. Nuttall to believe a fantastic tale that causes him to flee the house. There's more than a touch of malice in Vera, too, as he manipulates and frightens a man with nervous disorders into thinking he's seeing ghosts. The chance visitor, Mr. Nuttall, by listening the story of young lady, 15 years old young lady, believes that the ghost coming from the window, and he runs away from the house. So Vera reveals or demonstrates herself to be a posed and a cool character too when she concocts yet another fantastic tale on the spot to explain Mr. Nuttall's sudden flight from the house. Why Mr. Nuttall ran away from the house was also unknown, but she crafted a story, another story. The nature of Vera's story, once a Gothic ghost tale, the author of fantastic stories set in India, in which Nuttall supposedly covers freshly dog grape all night while a pack of dogs over him, tell us something about our reading habits, which appear to be towards sensationalistic genre of literature. We can intuit that she injects versions of these stories into her real life because she enjoys the amusement and the power it gives her. So in Monroe's or in Saki's short story of teenage mischief, the open window, in this story, the main character is Vera, a 15-year-old young lady who is also the niece of Mrs. Sapleton. The latter is the woman who Mr. Flampton Nuttall comes to visit as a formal guest to be able to spend some time away after having suffered a nervous breakdown. Because Mr. Nuttall, who had gone to Mrs. Sapleton house just to settle down his nervous system because he was suffered from the nervous disorder. So Biraj's character is well foreshadowed in the very beginning after he meets Mr. Nuttall. When she welcomes him in, Saki describes the following. My aunt will be down presently, Miss Nuttall, said a very self-possessed young lady of 15. In the meantime, you must try and put up with me. She says that. The young lady, Vera, tells Mr. Nuttall like this. And here we see that Vera is self-possessed, which means that she has the manners, the attitude, and the persona of someone who is well under control of herself. This, when compared to the present state of Frampton, serves as an indicator that the two contrast greatly. However, it tells us also that out of the two, it is Bera who has the potential of controlling the entire situation to her wishes. This is why she softly adds that one sentence which foreshadows her. You must try and put up with me. That means she tells the story. She takes the responsibility of engaging her as if she is given that responsibility by Mrs. Sapleton. And from that alone, we can sketch Vera as a cunning, mischievous. She is not necessarily a bad kid, just a mischievous, trying and curious one, and as a quite much wiser than we think. So during our story about the open window, which is false and calculated to scare Frampton, Vera shows a myriad of well-planned mannerisms that account for her love of mischief. She dramatizes, elaborates, embellishes, takes away truths and adds lies and controls her story just for sake of driving Frampton crazy. Her intention seems to be um, uh, terrifying Mr. Nuttall. She does this for no other reason than to please herself. So by telling such, imaginative story, she enjoys herself. This helps us sketch Vera further as a dramatic, creative, inventive, artistic, and of course, a bit perverse kind of character. After witnessing the arrival of the three much alive housemen coming from hunting, Frampton has become so enthralled with Vira's story that when he saw the supposedly dead men arriving back to the manor, he blasted off in a panic because Mr. Nuttall was in nervous disorder. That's why what Vera told, he believed. So he just looked the dead people coming to the house through the window, and that made him flee from the house. Vera does not acknowledge nor makes much of the situation. So she simply explained to her aunt how curious Mr. Frampton was in coming and going this way. This seals and deal. Vera is a girl who may have become so bored with life in the country, in the village, as many other country, Victorian state young ladies did, that she has excelled at the art of storytelling. So storytelling can be used by reading this story. We understand that storytelling can be used to avoid the monotony, to avoid the boredom of young people in the village. So they are so skillful in telling these stories. We cannot take away the hint that Saki gives us with Bera. See, her wit, her storytelling techniques, and her bit of malice reminds us of another witty, malicious storyteller. Saki was himself a very skillful storyteller. So this is the end of the story, and then there are some possible questions. I've just skipped over here. The first question is, when did Mrs. Sapleton tragedy happen and how? So Mrs. Sapleton's tragedy happened 3 years ago, according to Vera, according to that young 15 years old lady. Mrs. Sapleton's husband and her two brothers went out through the window for hunting, but they never came back home. And that was Mrs. Sapleton's tragedy, as Vera told. The next question is, what has the window got to do with the tragedy? The window is kept open, thinking that these missed three people will come back through the window. And always, Mrs. Appleton kept that window open. So that is the story of the open window. That is all. I hope this video will help you. Thank you very much. I will come up with the next video again. So hope you will enjoy watching. Don't forget to write the questions. If you have any questions or queries, please leave in the comment box. And if you like it, you share or you subscribe the channel. Thank you very much. See you in the next video.